Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 340. Today, the Amateur Traveler, let's get small. We're going to go to 4 microstates in Europe: San Marino, Andorra, Monaco, and Liechtenstein.
One more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have 3 news stories for you. In the first one, in case you thought you had problems with your luggage, 100 suitcases that went through Heathrow Airport, Terminal 5, had problems because a pipe burst, and apparently they were covered in sewage. Now, that's a bad situation, but obviously unusual. The thing about the story that I found disturbing was apparently that some people suggested the leak may be because the terminal was built on a former sludge works. In more upbeat news about air travel, a 83-year-old flight attendant just retired after a 63-year career with United Airlines. The flight attendant, Ron Akana, was one of the first men who was hired to be, at that time, a flight steward. He didn't even know what that position meant, but he knew that it would get him a chance to get to the mainland, which was rare in those days because when he started his career, Harry Truman was president and Hawaii was not a state and wouldn't be one for a decade. So congratulations, Ron, on your retirement, and I hope you enjoy it. And then speaking of things that people enjoyed in air travel, a Vietnam airline was fined because they did an in-flight bikini show, which they did not get approved with the national government. 4 local beauty queens in bikinis strutted down the aisle doing a dance to a song with the lyric, "I'm crazy for banana." For links to all 3 of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome back to the show Gary Arndt from everything-everywhere.com, come to talk to us about microstates in Europe. Gary, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Gary and I actually speak almost once a week or once every other week or so on another podcast, for those of you who don't listen to This Week in Travel. And Gary has been on Amateur Traveler. We came up with 4 times, but it took us a while to come up with all 4. Micronesia, the Gulf states, the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and the Canary Islands.
Yeah, so as I described it, I kind of fill in the gaps in the Amateur Traveler, all the little places. So I'm like the grout for the show.
I like that.
All the episodes are the bricks or the tile. I'm the grout.
There is an advantage to having done everything and gone everywhere, that you have been to some of those places that others have not been to. So we do take advantage of your expertise for that. You haven't quite been everywhere yet.
I know, but I'm working on it.
You are indeed. What is your list of places left to go? How long is the list?
Oh, it's pretty extensive. It's longer than the places I've been.
Okay.
The list I use is the Traveler Century Club list.
Okay.
And they have 321, I think, locations. So they divide things up beyond just United Nations members.
Sure.
To say, like, the United States would be divided into its territories: Guam, Marianas Islands, American Samoa, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and then continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, like that.
Right. Well, and then I think Hong Kong gets counted separately, and Macau,
Right.
and all those other interesting states that are not quite states.
Yeah, each emirate in the United Arab Emirates is considered separate. Each of the island groups in Indonesia is kind of considered separate. So that's how they break it up.
And speaking of not quite a state, we're talking about countries that are real countries but are pretty darn small. Now, we are skipping the Vatican just because we've talked about it before on the Rome show. And although it is technically its own country, really you're going to see it on a trip to Rome.
Yeah, and the Vatican is different because it was created for a political reason. It was created in the 1920s.
Versus all those other countries?
Well, yes, actually. There are no natives of the Vatican. So everyone in the Vatican has a dual passport, even the Pope.
Right.
The current Pope would have a German passport. All Vatican passports are diplomatic passports. If you're born in the Vatican, which no one ever is, you're not a citizen of the Vatican. So it's a very different kind of country.
Okay. Skipping that, though, what order do you want to tackle these 4 microstates in Europe?
Well, there are traditionally 4 in Europe, and they are Andorra, Liechtenstein, Monaco, and San Marino. And they all have very unique histories. And the one thing they have in common is that they're all very, very tiny.
Well, and they've all developed a different way of making money, too, of standing out in some way.
Yeah, well, why don't we start with San Marino? Because I think that might be the one people are least knowledgeable about.
Unless they're stamp collectors.
Ah, yeah. Well, then the most serene Republic of San Marino, which is, I think, one of the best names of any country in the world. If you look at the history of Italy, Italy used to be a bunch of small city-states. So like Venice, the Papal States, they were all these tiny little states. And in the 19th century, Italy unified. But for some reason, San Marino remained a republic. And I was always curious for why this was. And to get to San Marino, it's not hard, but you have to basically take a train, I think it was to Rimini, and then from there you take a bus, and then you take the bus into San Marino.
And you're up in the Alps.
No, it's not in the Alps.
Okay.
It's closer to the Adriatic. There are some hills, but they're not very large mountains. Yeah, it's not in the north of Italy. It's south of, say, Venice. I remember when I was going there from Florence, I took a train to Bologna, and then you go south again to get there.
And it sounds like you looked up the history and why it didn't become part of the United Italy?
2 extremely quirky, chancy events in its history led to San Marino remaining independent. One is that one of Napoleon's chief advisors was from San Marino. And so when he conquered Italy, he basically left San Marino alone as a favor to his friend, and in fact even offered to extend their territory if the Marinese wanted, which they intelligently said, no thanks, because they knew that when Napoleon was gone, then the territory that they got would probably want to break away and they'd want revenge. So they were never conquered by Napoleon. And then in the unification of Italy, when the leaders of the unification of Italy, one of them actually ended up hiding in San Marino. And as a way of honoring them when they let him hide there, when he unified Italy, he left San Marino alone.
So they were invited, I assume, but they chose not to join.
Right. And so if those 2 historical events hadn't happened, San Marino would probably be part of Italy.
And we're talking about, when we talk about microstate, basically this is a town.
Yeah. I mean, the population is about, I want to say 30,000.
Oh, it's that much. Okay.
It's basically situated on a large hill. There are three, its crest has three towers on it that are on top of the three hilltops. And most of the people I actually think don't live on the hill anymore. There's an area down below. But yeah, in fact, they recently also started diplomatic relations with the United States.
Huh.
And there was a picture online of the Marinese ambassador to the United States meeting with George Bush.
And I mentioned stamps. The first time I heard about them was when I was back in elementary school and I started a stamp collection. And they made not just some of the most interesting stamps, but some of the most unusual. So I remember they had a series of stamps that were Disney characters. And it's like, well, who is this little country and why do they have these stamps? Do they have a Disneyland? No, they don't.
Yeah, I should also note they're part of the Euro. And so everyone in the Eurozone gets to make coins on the basis of, I think, how big the country is. So San Marino does get to make coins, but not very many. And as a result, they're valued by collectors. And I actually got a San Marino Euro coin when I was there.
Now, as I understand it, on the Euro, the front is the same and the back depends on the country. So what's on the back of a San Marino Euro coin?
Man, I can't remember. I think it was the shield.
Okay.
Or the crest of San Marino, which was the three hills, but I'm not positive.
And when we go to San Marino, is there any particular sites that we should take in?
Go to the old city, and this is where up in the hill, so it's a walled fort, and it's mainly tourism now. So you'll see lots of tour buses that come there, and they have a changing of the guard ceremony, and most of the economy is basically centered around tourism.
Okay.
So basically, you can just walk around. It's a very quaint, walled Italian city, and you'll get some interesting photos, and some of the towers can be quite striking. And like I said, they have a very interesting history that they're very proud of and very happy to tell everyone. And as we're recording this right now, the Summer Olympics is going on. And I don't know if you're watching the opening ceremony, but they were there. They had San Marinese athletes participating. And I should note, for all of the countries we're talking about, none of them have an airport, and all but Monaco lack a train station.
Right.
If you want to visit San Marino, it's not, oh, I'm going to book a flight to San Marino. You kind of do have to work a little bit to get there.
Now, with San Marino, if I didn't know where the borders were and I happened to be wandering across Italy and I ended up in San Marino, would I know I wasn't in Italy?
Not really. I mean, culturally, it's Italian. They speak Italian. You're going to get Italian television stations. The only way you would notice is a sign if you were walking on a road that said you're now entering San Marino.
Okay.
Other than that, yeah, there's not really much of a difference.
Okay. Shall we move on then?
Sure. Let's talk about Monaco. Most people are probably more familiar with Monaco than any of the others for one reason, and that is Princess Grace.
Right.
Who married the Prince of Monaco, and that became very famous. And it's also easier to get to Monaco probably than any of the other microstates, simply because there's a train that goes there, and it's very close to Nice in France.
Right. And I'm not sure that the younger listeners all would remember Princess Grace. She had died a little while ago now, but she was an American movie actress, a movie star, Grace Kelly, who married into royalty. So,
of the countries we're talking about, Monaco is by far the smallest one in terms of area. It is very easy to walk across the entire country in about an hour. And that's not really an exaggeration. And it's best known for the casino that's there. It is known for banking. It's known for a lot of luxury yachts that come there.
I was going to say you had to mention the luxury yachts because they are huge.
And you see when you're there these signs for luxury yacht services. So I guess they need crews, they need refurbishing every so often, and this is where a lot of it's done for tax reasons. And then, of course, they have a Formula One race every year,
right,
which basically kind of takes over a big chunk of the country.
And having been to Monaco, it's tough for me to picture the country as a racetrack because there isn't a lot of space there, as we've mentioned, and it's kind of on the side of a hill to start with.
I was there just after the Formula One race, so the track was still up. And basically, normal traffic is on the track while you're doing it because it's a road race. And so basically they're setting up embankments and walls and other things. And then on the day of the race, they close it off to traffic, clean it. And then when the race is over, they open it up again. I think they kind of have it down to a science as far as how they can convert the streets. But if you want to visit Monaco, I think you can go there in one day and pretty much see everything there is to see.
Mm-hmm.
Your best bet is to probably stay in Nice and just take the train into Monaco. I think it's maybe a little over a half-hour train ride.
Yeah, that's what we did.
There's the Monte Carlo Casino, which is also very famous, but
dress appropriately. Did you get into the casino?
I didn't even try. I was wearing sandals and shorts, and I had lunch there, which is basically not at the casino, but just in Monaco, and
right.
It was on the beach. And I got to say, I didn't think they had a particularly nice beach. It was very rocky.
Right.
But everyone there was dressed very nice, and I kind of felt out of place. But yeah, it's something you can easily see in a day. Stay in Nice and just kind of do it as a day trip from Nice, and it's the most accessible probably of the microstates.
Sure. And again, the changing of the guard, lots of tourism and shops.
Even if you just walk around, you'll find some sculptures located in different parts of the city that are kind of interesting. But again, it's a very small area, and they pack a fair number of people into it. I think their population is like 35,000, but it may be a little bit more. The number of people there is actually probably higher at any given time, given tourists and people staying in hotels, and especially if you're there during one of the events.
I was surprised when we were there. We went to the church where Princess Grace was buried, and what a popular, almost pilgrimage site that is even today.
Yeah, I think Grace Kelly getting married is probably the best thing for marketing they probably ever could have done.
And then, of course, she died tragically, for those who don't remember, in an auto accident. And so it kind of ended that story, I think, a little prematurely for some people. And so that, I think, adds a little poignancy to her gravesite, too, is the people who remember the day that Grace Kelly, Princess Grace, died.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that the royal family there hasn't gone back to try to marry celebrities.
Find another.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe that is yet to come. At this point, the royal family, I think, is famous enough on their own that they don't need to look for someone famous. Although the history of the Grimaldi family is kind of interesting in terms of how they ended up with their own state too. It's again one of those, I think, with a little more political intrigue than the story of San Marino.
The family's the Grimaldi family, is it?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it was actually taken over by Napoleon, but then once Napoleon was deposed, the Grimaldi family got control again. And I think it also, you'll notice that with the exception of San Marino, all of the countries we're talking about are between two other countries. And the area in southern France that is currently French, that part of Nice, used to be Italian. And I think one of the reasons it was able to remain independent is because they were basically able to play the French and the Italians off on each other.
Right. Well, we say Italian, it was Italian speaking and Italian in culture, but it was actually part of a different country. This is before the unification of Italy. So yeah, right. Here's the story. Francis Grimaldi, and I'm sorry that I didn't remember this, but they have the picture of him. They have the statue of him dressed as a Franciscan monk. He was greeted at the gates of Monaco's castle, only then to seize the castle with his cousin Rainier I, Lord of Caen, and a group of men behind them. The event is commemorated on the coat of arms, on which supporters are two monks armed with swords. And he held the citadel for 4 years before being chased out by the Genoese. So this is the guy who started, basically, he snuck in.
It's probably a better story than what's behind most European countries.
Excellent. Anything else we should tell people to see when they're in Monaco or Monte Carlo? We didn't mention the name of the town.
Yeah, if you go to the casino, there's a really interesting sculpture out front, which is basically a shiny parabolic disc. And I thought it kind of took some interesting photos. Kind of really out of place for what you'd think at a casino like that. But yeah, if you do want to visit the casino, make sure you dress well. Don't wear tennis shoes, wear long pants.
I want to say that a tie is required as well. Or tie and jacket.
That I don't know, but probably wouldn't hurt to bring one.
But it is definitely someplace where they are looking for a particular class of tourist, I think, is probably the right way to say it. Excellent. And where shall we go from here?
How about Liechtenstein?
Liechtenstein. Driven through there. That's all I remember.
I went there. I was in Zurich, Switzerland. and I just had to go to Liechtenstein because it's one of those places that I've always heard about growing up. You'd seen in a map. It was always, you know, how they have to draw a circle around it in order to actually show where it is, because otherwise it would never show up on a map.
Right.
And I always kind of wanted to visit Liechtenstein because there had been a National Geographic article I'd read about it, and it's not that hard to get to, especially from the Switzerland side. Basically, from Zurich, it's about an hour train ride, and you take it to the city of Bux, which is right across the river from Liechtenstein. And then you get off the train, and then they have a Liechtenstein bus service that runs. And one of the stops is in Switzerland. And then you just hop on the bus, and it will take you basically up and down the road in Liechtenstein. There seems to be basically one major road that connects most of the businesses in the population center.
And I want to say Liechtenstein is a little larger than the two we've talked about previously.
Wikipedia says its current population is about the same as Monaco, maybe a little bit higher. It's like 36,000. But basically,
same
roughly
area?
the same. I think it's larger than San Marino, or definitely than Monaco.
Okay.
So it'd be the second largest of the microstates. But basically, yeah, it's located between Switzerland and Austria. And I've kind of think of it as it's a Swiss canton that happens to have a seat in the United Nations. Basically, they speak Swiss German. They use the Swiss franc as their currency. They are not a member of the European Union, so they have their own. The license plates are a little bit different. They don't use the euro, like I mentioned. They use the Swiss franc. They are neutral, which is, I think, also why they were not involved in World War II. They were never invaded by the Germans. And like I said, it's kind of just like Switzerland with a twist on it. Because they're independent, they have a bit more liberal banking laws, lower tax rates. And so that's where they do a lot of banking business. And as you noted, they also do a fair amount of business in terms of stamps.
So you have a hard time actually at that point trying to differentiate them. They're like the Swiss, except that they're into banking and neutral.
They're more into banking. I think they have basically lower rates of taxation. And like I said, they're independent. But it's offset by the fact that it's harder to get to. So rather than flying into like Geneva or Zurich, getting to Liechtenstein is a bit more difficult.
Anything else memorable about Liechtenstein?
You can't walk it as easily as you can, say, San Marino or Monaco. It's not that small. I actually did end up walking a good chunk of it. The largest city, quote unquote, in Liechtenstein is Vaduz, Schaan, and Vaduz is the capital. And you can easily walk. It's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins because like I said, it's all on one road. And what I did is I took the bus from Bux in and then just got off at some point where I felt like the bus had gone far enough and then just walked back. And it took me maybe 2 hours. So it was a good walk, and you're able to see a good chunk of the country in the process of doing so. But it's just basically a small town in Switzerland, which is what you, just like San Marino, you'd think is a small town in Italy. Culturally speaking, it's pretty much Swiss.
The one interesting historical fact that I saw is, so this is founded by people who were related to the Austria-Hungary, the Habsburgs. And at the close of World War II, Czechoslovakia and Poland seized the assets of this family, or of Liechtenstein, in Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia. And so during the Cold War, citizens of Liechtenstein were not allowed to go to Czechoslovakia. This own little private feud with Czechoslovakia.
I should also note they were the smallest country to actually win an Olympic medal.
Oh, interesting.
They've won several medals in alpine skiing.
All right. That seems an appropriate sport for that country.
Yeah, and I think that they won them legitimately too. They weren't like, oh, someone got Liechtenstein citizenship just so they could go to the Olympics. These were actual people born and raised in Liechtenstein who skied there and legitimately won medals in the Olympics.
The people who compete for some other country are not the people who are going to win the medals. If you can't compete for your home country, you don't go to compete for some other country just because you're that good.
I think it's a fun day trip if you're ever in Zurich. And I think it's easier to get to Liechtenstein from the Swiss side than it is from the Austrian side. but it is accessible from the Austrian side as well, just because Zurich is so close. That's the closest major city.
Okay. Excellent.
Liechtenstein is a monarchy or a principality. And the head of Liechtenstein is, I think the prince is Hans Adam or Alois or something. He once offered several years ago to sell the entire country to Bill Gates.
Okay.
And you can actually rent out the country for conventions.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
don't know what that means to rent out an entire country, but they had a thing where you could basically pay a very large sum and you could claim to rent out the entire country for a convention. And I thought that would be kind of a neat convention. Maybe they could have T-Bex there, T-Bex Liechtenstein.
Well, so that just says that the reason why the owner of Oracle bought Lanai instead of Liechtenstein is probably that he likes to snorkel more than he likes to ski.
That would probably be it. Yeah, and then let's talk about the last one, the giant of the group, Andorra. This is probably the hardest one to visit because it's located in the Pyrenees. There are no major cities nearby. I visited Andorra from the Spanish side, and just like Liechtenstein can be thought of, they speak German, San Marino speaks Italian. Andorra basically can be considered part of Catalonia. It's the only country in the world that has Catalan as an official language. And their form of government is officially called a co-principality. And this was the ingenious thing they did that allowed them to remain independent with all the wars going on. And what that means is basically they have two princes, one of which was French and one of which was Spanish. One of which was secular, one of which was religious. So the two princes of Andorra, the heads of state, are the president of France and the Bishop of Urgell, which is the Spanish diocese that Andorra is part of and is also just over the border in Spain.
So the president of France, so one of the two princes is elected by people outside the country.
Exactly.
Well, actually, I guess one's appointed.
Right. If you think about it, it was a rather brilliant thing to do. If you have these two giant countries on either side of you, either one of which could overtake you if they wanted, by basically letting them become head of state. If either one attacks, you're going to be offending the other. So it kind of placed them each against each other and allowed them to remain independent. I also got to visit the parliament in Andorra, which was kind of interesting. It was the most informal parliament I've ever seen. It's a small country, and I should say population-wise, it's, I want to say 85,000. So it's much bigger than the other microstates, and size-wise, it's much bigger as well. So you can't go to Andorra, I think, in one day and expect to see everything. You may want to spend a weekend there. But basically, when I went to visit the parliament, it was like seeing a city council meeting. Some people were dressed in blue jeans, very, very informal.
Now, you said it was hard to get to. My understanding is the way that most people get to Andorra is a bus package trip to go shopping.
That would probably be right. There are direct buses which run from Barcelona. So that would probably be the closest major airport. And it's about a 2-hour bus ride that will take you there. One of the traditional big parts of the Andorran economy has been, and I didn't know this until I went there, was tobacco. They grow a large amount of tobacco and smuggled it into France and Spain. And cigarette smuggling has been a big part of the economy for decades in Andorra because they had routes that the smugglers would take over the mountains to get cigarettes in.
To avoid the taxes.
Yeah. And they are also not part of the European Union. They use the euro as a de facto currency, but they're not officially part of the euro. And when I came in from Spain, I had a rental car. The interesting thing is that for most of the borders we're talking about, they're basically non-existent, right? There's maybe a sign that says you're now entering, and that's about it. But with the Andorran-Spanish border, there actually was a border, and the Spanish were checking everyone's cars because they have such lower tax rates and because cigarettes are so much cheaper. There's still a lot of people that will go over the border to shop. And because I was an American, they basically just flagged me through because they didn't care. They were more concerned about the locals.
They're trying to collect VAT taxes, or what exactly?
Yeah, I think there's a limit to how much you can buy.
Okay.
And so they basically search people's cars to make sure they're not bringing in too much, or there's a limit on I think the number of cartons of cigarettes or something like that you can bring in.
Well, and I'd have to say that when I heard about someone's trip to Andorra and they were talking about just busloads of tourists shopping, it didn't raise it on my list of places to go to.
In a lot of ways, I think it actually might be the most interesting of the small countries, having been there.
Interesting. Okay.
Because you can actually go up into the mountains and hike, which is what I did. I spent an afternoon hiking in the Pyrenees. And because of the way the country is situated in the mountains, all of the population is in the valley floor. And so there's a whole lot of space that can't be built up because it's all mountainous. And so there were some old ironworks that I visited, and these were like hundreds of years old, smelting iron. People, because there was iron deposits up in the Pyrenees, they were a source of iron for a long time. Some very old Catalonian churches are still in Andorra that you can visit, which are very similar to what you'll see on the Spanish side of the border. So yeah, there's a lot more to the country. And some of the car rides I took, it took a half an hour to get from one place to the next, just because you have to drive around a mountain to go from one valley to the next.
But did anything surprise you about Andorra?
It's grown a lot. It's very populated now, and it's getting quite expensive. And some of the people I talked to in Andorra were kind of complaining about it because a lot of people were moving to Andorra. I think they've probably had some of the highest rates of immigration of the microstates. They tend to be more open to it than other countries.
And I'm guessing tax advantages or something?
Yeah, and just standard of living. That, and it's, like I said, it's not an easy place to get to. You got to really want to go to Andorra to get there because of how it's situated in the mountains. San Marino's on a hill. Liechtenstein is kind of in a mountainous area, but not in the same way that Andorra is. But it's the biggest co-principality in the world.
Is it the only co-principality in the world?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like you pointed out, it is the only country in the world whose head of state is elected by another country.
That is unusual. Well, we didn't say, actually, we talked about biggest in the world. San Marino, as I recall, claims to be the longest currently running republic in the world.
Yes. The ancient history of San Marino is that it was originally Saint Martin, who it's named after, was a saint during the Roman times. And he went to the hills basically to hide out. And over time, I think after the Roman Republic fell, the people there created their own small republic that has basically existed ever since.
All right. As we look at this whole collection of things all at once, any warnings you would give?
No, I mean, these are all very developed areas, high standards of living. I think that all of these are basically best, if you have a desire to visit these countries because you want to say you visited, to check them off your list. And you're basically going to visit it as part of a trip to someplace else.
Right, sure.
So if you're going to, say, even Venice, you could probably visit San Marino on a day trip, or if you're going to Florence, Nice, Barcelona, and Zurich are probably the large cities that would be closest to these countries. Take 1 or 2 days to go visit. Andorra will probably take the most time to get there just because of its location up in the mountains. But they're fun places to visit, and usually you can walk away with some stamps or some money or something to show that you were there, and something you can tell your friends.
Or cigarettes. Then.
Yeah.
Most memorable person you met, local?
Would probably be one of the guides I had when I was hiking in Andorra, who was actually half South African and half Andorran.
Okay.
I didn't know there was such a thing until then. And who just did a really good job of showing me the region, taking me up in the mountains, showing me the area, telling me some of the history about it, and also telling me a lot of the stories about the cigarette smugglers and this part of history that they don't probably talk about that much, or that the tourism board wants to stress, but is actually a really important part of the history of the country. Mm-hmm. You can still see tobacco fields today. That's probably their biggest agricultural crop, and is still represented by the fact that they're checking for cigarettes at the border.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in...
That's the problem. I don't think any of these countries have something that's only in.
Okay.
The only place you're probably going to find a San Marinese coin is going to be in San Marino. Unless you happen to be extremely lucky and find one maybe somewhere else in Italy. That's probably the only place you're going to find it is in San Marino.
Okay. And I don't even know if it's worth doing. You really know you're in.
You really know you're in one of these countries when you see a sign at the border that says you are in this country. That's, probably the only way you're going to notice, because they're so small culturally.
Right.
They are dwarfed by their neighbors. So they don't necessarily have a lot of things which are going to jump out at you the moment you're there, especially if you don't speak the language. There may be very subtle differences that a local could tell you about, but they're not necessarily going to be noticeable.
The only thing I could think of would be Monaco is the yachts. That really stood out for me, seeing just this fleet of massive, massive yachts. And I mean 5 times longer than I thought a yacht size was.
Yeah, I don't think there's many places in the world that are going to have that many high-end luxury yachts.
I mean, it looked like a private navy.
One other thing I didn't actually mention, the first actually democratically elected communist government in the world was in San Marino.
Oh, okay.
In the late 40s and early 50s.
Did it take? Are they still communist?
No, but it was the first place that it actually happened. There were some other countries after the fall of the Soviet Union where the Communist Party was elected to power, but San Marino was the only place where a communist government was ever elected where there was not previously a communist revolution.
Interesting. And then, the last question is usually, what 3 words would you use? How about 1 word per country?
Small, postage stamps, tourism, and smuggling.
Where can people read more about your travels, Gary?
They can find me at everything-everywhere.com or on Twitter at everywheretrip.
And are you on any other wonderful podcasts?
I do occasionally show up on a podcast called This Week in Travel, where there are some other people that I usually carry, but...
And where are you coming back to us next time? What little grout country are we going to be talking about?
We talked about the next one being the islands of Haida Gwaii in British Columbia.
And we'll let people just look that one up. Thanks so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I got this very encouraging email today from Diane, who says, "Greetings, I've only just listened to your episode on travel to Yorkshire and found Elspeth to be utterly delightful. I wish the interview could have gone on and on. Please pass along my appreciation to Elspeth for her time and insight to this lovely area, of which I have visited, enjoyed, and fell in love with. Might she have an email address she would wish to share? I think it would be pleasant to strike up an informal communication with her, should she be so inclined. I love hearing the locals' take on their country. Thank you, too, for inviting this charming woman to be a guest on your show. This episode for me is a keeper to be listened to again and again to whet my appetite for another visit to Yorkshire and to see all the places brought to life by Elspeth." Thank you so much, Diane. And Diane, thank you so much for your encouraging words. I wanted to read this not just because it's actually, as it turns out, the second most encouraging email I got today, but the other one is not about the amateur traveler, but also because the question comes up periodically about getting in contact with our guest. And obviously, I don't want to post a guest's email on the site or send it along without their permission, but I'd be glad to forward, as I did with Diane's letter, an email off to any particular guest you have questions for. And I think almost always the guests are glad to connect and to answer any questions you may have. We had Hunter Hilgis on the show recently talking about Las Vegas, and he has, as we mentioned, a travel app. He has kindly given us some free copies, and so the first 7 people, I think that's how many we have left, who go to the Amateur Traveler Facebook group, facebook.com/Amateur Traveler, and find the link in there, can get a free copy of that travel app. So in case you're going to Las Vegas, this could help you plan your trip. And then I loved this email that I got from John. "I have been an avid listener for some years now and enjoy allowing my imagination to expand on the daily commute. I live in Gloucester, England. I travel a fair amount for both business and pleasure, but have started to consider those places left on the to-do list. Well, I have just come back from Wisconsin. I have always wanted to go to the Oshkosh AirVenture, and my son wanted to visit Green Bay. All worked fine. He saw the first day of training, and I overdosed on airplanes. We also visited some lovely places. Sturgeon Bay was fun, rented a house in Two Rivers. Very friendly people, good beer. Did not manage all the places you mentioned in your podcast, but a few. Only odd point was a guy in a grocery store who could not understand why we could come over from England to Wisconsin. Sad that people don't always appreciate what is outside their front door. Had a couple of days in Chicago on the way back home. Great city and a real surprise. Keep up the good work, John. John, thanks so much. It is always very encouraging to hear that people are using the travel advice, and I was a little surprised you had gone too. Glad you had a wonderful time. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email, as John did, to host@amateurtraveler.com, or leave a comment on this episode so that other people can see it. Again, at amateurtraveler.com. You can also join the Facebook group. Remember that Las Vegas iPhone app that's available there at facebook.com/amateurtraveler, or follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.